This thing to start up. Perfect. All right. My name is Bob Roberts. I've been working at Trifecta Technologies for about 4.5 years. I was brought in for Java, but then transitioned onto a hybrid Salesforce and Java sort of role. So that puts me in close contact with Heroku for most of what I do. So we'll be starting off with some basics of Node.js with Express. Then we'll move on to communicating with Salesforce. And finally, we'll finish off by running our app on Heroku. So Node.js is, it's not its own programming language. It's simply a way to run JavaScript from the server. This is done using Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine, which until recently it was the fastest out there. Right now, Firefox and Chrome are sort of trading back and forth who has the better one. But at this point, it's still incredibly fast. There's a large number of companies out there that use this for, if not their entire application stack, at least a portion of it. These include things like New York Times, eBay, PayPal. Microsoft actually uses it for a portion of their Azure suite, I believe it's called. There's a lot more companies on there. I just wanted to highlight these because these are the ones that people would actually recognize. But because this is such a fresh sort of technology, there's a lot of startups that are using it because it is quick to start with. It's low cost, and it taps into a lot of previous experience using JavaScript. So Node.js at its core is just the V8 JavaScript engine. They don't make really any deep changes to it. They don't augment it in any way. What they do is promote extensions, the plugins basically. And what these extensions allow is, well, almost anything, within reason, of course. These extensions are anything from frameworks to Lodash for handling collections. We're going to be using one called JSForce in just a little bit. As of writing, there are 104,000 of them. Not all of them are as useful as others. There's one, in fact, that all it does is return false. That's the entire plugin, is returning false. Can't say I totally understand it, but it's out there. Now, plugins can be downloaded through NPM. If you've ever used apt-get, Yum, any of the Linux package managers, or on Mac, you can use Brew. Any of those, same deal. You type in npm install and the package you're looking for, and if your name is correct, it'll pull it right down into your project. So I've made a few technological decisions when going forward with this upcoming demo. And one of them is that I did not use straight Node.js. Now, Node.js with one plugin, you can do regular HTTP stuff. You can handle web requests, you can send information back, and it's very easy, it's very straightforward. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to inspire a sense of, look at what we can do, look at the possibilities. And while it was cool and simple to use, it didn't really, you looked at it and you said, okay, I can print out hello world. But where does that get me from there? So we're adding in ExpressJS. This is a framework. It's basically what Ruby is, it's what Rails is to Ruby, or Spring is to Java, or I think Django is to Python. Anyone can, yep, that's about it. This one is a bit different than some of the other ones, though. It uses a form of cascading middleware. What you do is you set up a series of middleware objects, calls, functions, and it will go through them, the request will go through them one at a time sequentially, hitting pretty much everyone until it reaches one that doesn't pass the request on. And this is incredibly useful because it allows you to customize what you want it to do. That's the whole flexible and unopinionated point that I have there, is that you can throw in as much or as little of these pieces of middleware as you want. Each one of them will take the request and the response and modify them according to its documentation. I also went ahead and changed out the default rendering engine for Express. Express by default uses Jade. And Jade, if you can take a look at the syntax, it's simple, it's clean, and if you're used to it, I'm sure that that's the way to go. But I know from coming from a Java background and working with Visualforce as well, if anybody's more familiar with Visualforce, this looked alien. This looked uncomfortable, and this did not put me in a I want to try that mood. Hogan, on the other hand, Hogan felt incredibly familiar, and as I got more familiar with the rest of Express, I could see myself branching into Jade at some future time, but for now, for introducing it to everyone, I wanted to stick with something that would be comfortable and familiar to as many people as possible. There is also the benefit that you can use Hogan on the front end as well if you have an Angular app or, sorry, not Angular. Angular uses the attributes. Ember. Ember allows you to have templates like that. So you can use this in multiple different places, both on front and back end. So let's move on to the demo. Bring up the terminal. Now, I went ahead options here. I assumed that you installed Node because that would be boring to watch. I also assumed that you installed Express Generator because that one, I really want to make sure that that, beyond anything else, was in my package directory and taken care of before I started this demo. So, in order to make a new Express app, I just type in Express, the name, I'll call it demo. And then to use the new rendering engine, Hogan. And with any luck, perfect. So it's created a number of files here. It also goes ahead and tells us exactly what to do next. You can't get much easier than that. And it'll take a bit to think. Perfect. What that did was it changed directory into our new project, and then downloaded all of our dependencies for us. And that is what this little command does, is that if you have a specific file with all of your dependencies in it, typing in npm install will pull them all down all at once. So then we head into Sublime. Let's see. 1 second, let me actually figure out where I put this. Okay, that's what I did. Fair enough. In fact, you know what? Just to make sure I don't make any mistakes here, why don't I undo that? Right. Okay, the simpleness of that command actually got me there. I didn't check which directory I was in and created it in the wrong directory. But that's easy enough to remedy. I just delete it. Run the command again. Same exact as before. And this time, I'm in the right directory, I hope. So here we have our new folder. Has a number of files in here. This node modules is where all of those dependencies got downloaded into. We can safely ignore that. That's all handled by the package manager. Speaking of the package manager, this is the file that I was talking about with all the dependencies in it. it lists out the dependency along with its version number. And then we also have this right here. What this means is that all you have to do is from the command line run npm start, and it'll run whatever command is after that. In fact, you can use this to set up a number of different configurations, setting up variables, anything to make your job as a developer just a little bit easier. So we'll take a look at the bulk of the application, the app.js. Up here, what we're doing is we're taking all of our dependencies, and because dependencies are JavaScript modules, they can be then loaded into these variables, just like anything else. These are all the dependencies. We also load in 2 files from our own. These are basically your controllers for anybody who's worked with a normal model view controller sort of setup. So these controllers are split off and stuffed over here. That's just to keep things nice, simple, and clean in our main app. But in all reality, there's nothing that stops you from not putting that in here. Or sorry, there's nothing that stops you from putting that in here. It doesn't force you to do anything in any particular way. But as a best practice, better to keep that all split off. So we have that. Next, we make our app. We just call Express. No parameters there. So now we have an app. Perfect. We set where our views are located. And the reason we're doing this path.join rather than just telling it where the views are located is because this way, if we are using it on Windows, we get Windows path names. If we're using it on Mac, math pack names. We also tell it which view engine to use. Normally this would be Jade, but instead right now it's Hogan. These uses are all our middlewares. So first we set up a logger. The request comes in, hits the logger first. We parse out any JSON, any URL encoding. We parse the cookie. Now, if the request is for a resource in this public directory, then it won't go any farther. It'll just return the resource as it is. That's why it's static. So it returns our static resources. This is your front-side JavaScript, your CSS, your images, any of that sort of thing. Next, we get down to the middleware that we defined, our routes and our users. So this is basically telling it slash requests, head in here. Slash users, head in here. If we've gone past here and not actually gotten handled, we haven't found our route. And what better way to tell someone that than a 404? So we head in here, we hit this use, we create an error, so give it a message not found, set it to 404, and then we call next. And this is very important, and this is what makes the middleware, is this ability to pass on to the next middleware in line. So now we've passed on this error. Now, if we're in development, we'll hit this section here. Otherwise, we head down here. These two are essentially the same, except for one little detail. First, we set the status on our result. It's either a 404, or if something's gone really wrong. If something is not handled at all up here, we're going to end up with a 5 error. Something has clearly not happened correctly. Then we tell it to render the error template, and we give it a message of the error message. And then in this case, we pass it the error itself. This gives it the ability to print out more detail, which is perfect for development. But if you're not in development, the last thing you want to do is give your users a stack trace. If not for a usability standpoint, it looks ugly. But you also don't want to expose the internal workings of your application. That's the last thing you want to do, and the first thing that an attacker wants you to do. So after all that setup, we just export our app. So let's dig down into the controllers, these routes as they were.
So real quick,
Yeah.
did you write all this, or is this part of the Express generation?
This is all built in. This is the Express generator. I haven't done a single thing yet.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is lazy. But when your time is money, or your employer's money, then laziness works tremendously well if it's productive laziness. And this is productive laziness. So we go into our routes. We'll start with index.js because it is dead simple. We require Express again. We then make a router, just like we made an app before. We tell that router for get requests to / run this function. Now, as a best practice, you should just have next on here because then you can, if you have an error, rather than throwing an exception, that doesn't work as well in this case. What you do is you make up an error, pass it into next, and just like the 404 condition, that error will get passed down the line. So in this case, we tell it to render our index with the title of Express. And that's it. It takes this router, exports that, and that is how we get to this right here. So why don't we look at one of our views? You already got a small sampling of what a view looks like, and this is, I guess, even smaller. We just tell it HTML5, and then these double brackets here, they'll get replaced with the values that we passed into the render method. In this case, it's just title, title, title. This is not too interesting, but for not having written a single line of code yet, I'm okay with that. So, let's see, I think that's, silly of me. One last piece of this puzzle, the bin. There's a special file in here. It doesn't have a JS after it, but it is indeed a Node.js file. It has this little line up top. That way, you can actually call just this file, and what it'll do is it'll start up the app for it. It'll call Node and run Node with this setup. We set up some debug information. We set up we call in the app, so that gets set to there. We set the port to either 3000 or, and this is incredibly important for Heroku, we set it to the environment variable port. Now, the reason that's incredibly important for Heroku is because Heroku, you don't tell it what port you're going to use. It tells you what port you're going to use. So for debugging, fine and dandy to use 3000, but once you get onto Heroku, you need to have this there or it will not work. So we tell the app to listen on this port, and then we spit out this debug information. Now I can start the app. So, as defined in the proc file, or sorry, the package.js, which I mentioned in the very beginning of this, npm start. And with any luck, there's our debug information that we spat out. Localhost 3000. We know misspellings, we get Express. See. No code written, already have a web server. Yeah, that's it. That's the end. I promised you more, and I will deliver. So since this is the Salesforce, Lehigh Valley's Salesforce.com developer user group, if I remember the entire chain correctly, I got to relate this back to Salesforce. So we're going to get our Node.js instance to talk to Salesforce. How are we going to do that? Well, there's a few different choices. There's Salesforce API, JS Force. Those are both plugins from NPM. And then you could also do it with plain old REST. And now I'm going to toss that right out, only because, as we said earlier, lazy. Why reinvent a wheel that's already been crafted very carefully by other people? So in this case, I'm going to go with JS Force. It might be a bit shallow, but when I looked at the numbers on NPM, they give weekly, monthly, daily download stats, and JSForce was owning it. So I didn't set up a side-by-side comparison. I could have, maybe I should have, but I figured that if so many people were going with JSForce, they must know something about this. So why not go with that? This provides some helpers for login and authentication, for running queries, doing your regular operations on objects, create, read, delete, update. And under the vague description of other interactions, you can interact with the tooling API, chatter API. This is pretty much as much access as you can get in one plugin. So after that brief slide, back to another demo. Now this one there is no generator for, and I'd love to act like I know how to code in front of people. But in reality, the more people that watch me code, the worse my typos get. And as bad as my typos get, my debugging gets even worse. So I've gone ahead and I've set up a project ahead of time. It's better for everyone, trust me. So what have I added? Well, first off, I added Express Session because what we're going to do is we're going to authenticate, and then we're going to take our authentication information and stuff it into the session. This way you don't have to re-authenticate with each and every call to JSForce. We've also added another route, auth. I'll get to that in a moment. We set up our session. That's tossed into the middleware like everything else. We added this auth to the OAuth route. And I think that's the last change for this file. Nothing too major. Before I move on, though, because it will get important the second that I get into the auth endpoint there, is I set up this little utility just so that I can have all this localized to one location. What this does is it sets up JSForce, and then it creates a new OAuth session pretty much right from JSForce. Same as before, where we have this process.env and then environment variable name. And then we have our just hard-coded entries. Now I have the hard-coded entries for development because it's just simpler that way, but once again, you do not want to do this on Heroku. If you want any flexibility, you want to use these environment variables, and even more so, you don't want to be checking in secrets and clients and, client IDs and secrets into Git, especially if you're doing any open source work that might be posted on GitHub. This isn't the kind of information that you want out there. So now that we have this little utility, let's head into what our authentication actually does. So on a call to OAuth/auth, and I should have thought about how many times I'd be saying this when I name these, because this is getting to be a tongue twister here. But we grab our OAuth2 utility that we included up here and tell it to get an authorization URL. We give it the scope of the permissions that we are requesting, and then we redirect the user to that endpoint that it just gave us. Now, this authorization URL will be from Salesforce. That's what Salesforce is going to tell us to go to in order to authenticate. Once that's done, Salesforce will call back to us with the details, and that should hit this endpoint here. We tell this to grab a new connection with that OAuth2 again. We then grab a code off of the query parameter that came back with our callback. Our connection authorizes with that code and then calls this callback here. Now, this callback, if it has an error, populates this error entry. Otherwise, we have user info. So we have our access token and instance URL. These are what will be important for authenticating later or maintaining an authentication session. And then just for convenience sake, at least to know that you connected to the right endpoint, I print out the user ID and the org ID. Here's where we add them to the session, and then we redirect again, this time to accounts. Now this is why I didn't bother going into the users file from the last demo, because I was immediately going to throw that out the window for this one. So not users, but accounts. This time, if they come into accounts and hit the root of the accounts URL, so just the base URL accounts / what first happens is we check to make sure that they have this authentication or access token and an instance URL set up. If they don't, they're not authenticated, and we redirect them again back to the auth endpoint. Otherwise, we go in here, we set up a SQL query. Now this is just like you would do in in Apex or any other language that you integrate with. We grab our JForce connection again, this time with the access token and the instance URL. And with that new connection, we query this bit of SQL up here. And this, like the other one, returns an error and a result. Now this time I'm actually handling the error. If you notice, up here, one moment. Sorry, our television shut off.
Oh.
Okay. That was. It looks like we're suffering from an automatic timeout going on.
The whole audience is waiting. Show us continue.
Sorry, I know I kept you at the end of your seats, but everything is back in order now. So this time, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to handle that error with the Node.js or ExpressJS supported method. So we have our error. If it's null, don't care. But if it's not null, then something's gone wrong. We take our error, we log it out to the console, just because if we're not in a development environment, this won't get logged out to the screen. So we want to have some record of it. And then we pass along next with our error. If everything's doing correctly, though, I don't need to worry about this. I render our accounts template, give it a title. This time, I'm going to give it a whole list of the records that we returned. So what does our new view look like? Like this. It's a bit more complex, but we're exercising a bit more functionality. Hold on, it's going to bother me. It's there. So this new syntax here, with the hash mark up top and the / down at the bottom, what this is doing is it's saying loop over the accounts. Here we print the names from the accounts, and then we go in here, we grab the cases, and we grab the records off of those cases and print out their subjects. So let's see if this works. We're going to close out of our other demo since that's still running. And just as before. Okay. Now, I haven't set Express sessions up completely. I just set it up for the bare minimum that I needed to go through this with you, but I don't think anyone's going to mind too much. Right? Nothing's different. So we go to OAuth/auth. And as you can see, our URL has changed to be the standard login.salesforce.com. So this is the real benefit of using OAuth, is that you can authenticate against Salesforce. I didn't have to write this login screen. They will authenticate my identity and return me as long as everything's set up correctly. So I just log in with my demo account here. And I saw that I had a typo in demo.
I'm serious.
I know. See, if it happens just trying to log in, imagine what it would be like if I tried to code an entire application. Okay, so, oh, what do we have here? We have an error. In fact, this is the error that I passed along earlier. Seems that I have gone ahead and forgotten a single comma. But as you can see, we have our entire error here. We have the stack trace. It's telling us exactly what went wrong. This is perfect. How clumsy of me.
You didn't even type it.
I know. So we add in our comma. We save up. Now, I can have a piece of software running that will automatically restart Node when any files are changed. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and close this out and start it back up. Also, as you can see, printed out here as well, just in case the screen didn't show it. So, start back up again. Let's try this. Now, we had the session information in there from, actually, the URL changed. We didn't have the session information in there. We re-authenticated against Salesforce, but Salesforce still had me logged in. So, good enough. And here we printed out the top 10 accounts along with their cases. Yeah.
When you first authenticate the very first time, do you get that screen that says, this app is trying to use this and you have to allow it?
Yes, that's a good point. If this was the first time that I was authenticating this app against my instance, my org, I would have had a screen saying, hey, this app is asking for permission, may it access it? I, of course, being the slightly nervous, but always prepared presenter, I, of course, did this ahead of time. So that wraps up our 2 Node.js demos and segues nicely into actually getting it running on Heroku, because let's face it, a web app that only runs locally is not very useful. A few more slides, so I'll switch back to presenter. Okay, shifting gears dramatically to Heroku. Heroku started in 2007 and Salesforce acquired it back in 2010. Now, for many people who've used web hosts in the past, they're probably used to getting an FTP credential and a bucket, pretty much. They can put their PHP files there, they can put some static HTML, and that is your web instance, your web server. This is a little different. The difference is that it has a number of small processes, basically, that you can scale up or down to meet the needs of your current business. If you're doing something like an email blast, if you know that you're going to have a lot of people directed to your site, more than usual, you can crank up the amount of resources that your app has, at least for that small amount of time, and you'll only get charged for the amount of time that those resources are at that higher level. Now, Now, it also supports 7 languages officially. It started with Ruby and branched out from there. These include Ruby, Node, Python, Java, a few other ones. Can't remember them off the top of my head. But then it unofficially supports a whole pile of other languages. And these are managed through third parties who set up things called build packs. And these are what allows your application to be built and then run on Heroku. Now, because Heroku is a little bit different, there's of course going to be some differences in language. So we can think of a dyno as a single running command, well, like that npm start. That would be one dyno. And these dynos are further divided into 2 categories. We have worker dynos, which can sit around in the background. They can run as long as you let them, and they can work on any request as long as you want them to. But they're not accessible from the outside world. To access anything from the outside world, you need a web dyno. These are the ones that can receive and respond to requests, but the difference here is that you are only given 30 seconds to respond to a request. This is so that you don't have a slow, unresponsive application. And in all reality, having 30 seconds to answer a request, that should be more than enough, especially if you're trying to do a live interactive web app. You're not going to want to see that sort of delay anyway. To communicate between these two, you would add some sort of message passing system. Heroku has a number of add-ons that can facilitate this. And an add-on is a third-party service that has been made available to Heroku. And these do anything from send emails, pass messages, all of your databases. Those are all add-ons. So those can be added directly to your application, and it does a lot of configuration and setup for you. It makes that all very nice and easy. And then an app is just, it's the collection of all of this. It's all of your dynos, all of your add-ons. And for a single Heroku login, you can create as many of these apps. Well, I haven't found an upper bound yet. I'm sure maybe you might get a call from someone if you start going completely out there, but I haven't noticed it yet. Now, there's two main interfaces. The web interface, which has just recently seen a massive overhaul, and the command line interface. Web interface is nice for just regular day-to-day tasks because it's simple, it's out there, it exposes most of what you need. In fact, probably many developers can go quite a while without having to use the command line. That being said, the command line does have a lot of functionality to it. For one thing, you can script and automate some command line tasks. So you can batch things together and run them all at once. You can also extend them through plugins. For instance, Heroku repo has saved my backend more than a few times. What this can allow you to do is it allows you to access the Git repo. That's where all of your code is stored. It allows you to access that directly if something gets into not a good state. That's the best way I can put it. It would allow you to completely blow away your repository. And then the next push that you do there, everything is clean, all your Git references are reset, all your branches are back to how they should be, everyone is happy, and you're the hero. Heroku. Sorry. I had to make that joke once. I apologize that I've gone this long. Heroku config, this one is more of a time saver for me. This allows you to take the configuration for one org, pull it down all at once, and then push it up to another org or to the same org, backup, all in one go. And I'm saying org, I should be saying app. I'm still in Salesforce mode. Heroku OAuth, you can manage your OAuth tokens. That's how Heroku handles things behind the scenes on the command line. And now it's time for the Heroku web demo. This should really be a Heroku demo because we're going to start off in the command line. Can't escape that. So we're still in the Salesforce one. Perfect. Control. Let's see. Clear the screen. Now the first thing we're going to do is initialize a new. Okay, I'm going to make an assumption here that you guys have Git installed and that you have the Heroku tool belt installed. Okay, we already have a Git directory set up, but it is set up for the wrong Heroku app, so we're just going to remove that. Oh, well, that's a shame. Operation not permitted. Oh, well, we can move on from that anyway. So we do git init, just to make sure that we start off with some state. I tried to delete the old git, wasn't happening. So we got to make sure we have some state here. Okay, so we have, it did manage to initialize an empty repository. So now our project here has a Git repository. It's only local, but we can change that. Now we'll do Heroku. Oh, I also logged in ahead of time. Again, not big on typing in front of crowds. So Heroku create, and this is going to create our app. And then I'm going to pass something a little different on to the end of this. Now, in the past, if you wanted to have your Heroku app and be able to push out to it, you had to set up SSL certificates, and you had to set up and you had to manage these, and that was overall a pain in the neck. Not anymore. With that little parameter that I just gave it, what that's doing is that's saying, okay, use HTTPS for all the Git management, and to manage authentication, that's done through the Heroku tool belt. So the same application that we use to create this is going to be managing our authentication for when we push our code up. So first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add all of our files to our Git repository. Okay, that was simple. Then we're going to want to actually commit it. And here's where we give it a good and meaningful commit message. Very meaningful. Now, I should make note here that I had a few other changes to our humble little project here. I added this git ignore. Now, you're going to want to do this before you do that git add and git commit. This file basically says the node modules, which, as I said earlier, were all managed by npm, don't add them to our Git repository. And that's just fine, because if you're working with other people and they download your project, all you have to do is run npm install, and it'll pull down the dependencies. There is no need for you to have these sitting out there in your repository. So just a small change there. And while I'm talking about changes, how about this different little file here? What this is telling it is that we're going to have a web dyno, and this is the command it's going to run. As I said, a dyno is just a single command. And that's about it. So heading back to the terminal, can't leave that behind. So git push, and we tell it what remote we're going to push to, and what branch. Fantastic. Sometimes it asks me to log in again. So it detected a Node.js app, and I told it in a file that I wanted it to use the 10.x revision of Node. So it's setting that up. It's downloading all of our dependencies and importing them into the project. Here they are. It found our proc file. So it's starting up a web node. And it launched. That is all it takes to actually start a new Heroku instance. What did this thing actually call itself? I should have mentioned, Heroku will pick 2 words at random and then tack on 4 extra numbers. So our Heroku app is called Infinite Chamber 5905.
Question, could you have created your own name, or are you...
You know, I'm not...
Just a random...
That is a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I know that I can change the name after the fact, but I'm not 100% sure if I can change the name at creation time.
I think it auto-generates that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can.
Yeah. Yep. So, I'm gonna...
Is
So here we have our Heroku dashboard. I'm going to refresh until I find infinite chamber. There we are.
Those have sweet names, at least.
And as you can see, we have one node instance running. Now, if I was to get a little crazy here, if I wanted more instances, I can add more. They'll charge me for more, but this is all this is all it takes. Wow. That would be a pretty hard hit for one demo.
Is that per minute?
No. Luckily, no. But this is estimated per month.
So the reason you don't want to do that is because each web dyno can only process one request at a time, right? And if you start getting kind of pounded.
Well, they can each process one web request at a time. If you have Java, you can set up multi-threading. Node, because of its asynchronous nature, can, I believe, slot things in while other asynchronous functions are processing or waiting to process. But if you are hitting it hard enough, if there is enough people hitting your application, just that isn't going to cut it. You need to add more. So I'm going to I'm going to slide this back down before any mistakes are made, or I could just hit cancel. I'm going to stick with that. Back down to 1. That's how it should be. We're also going to add another add-on. Now we have an incredibly rich library of add-ons, far more than I have time to go through. Perfect, exactly where I want to be. We're going to add a logging add-on. And this is the most basic thing that you're going to want to put on there. You can also get logging from the console or the command line. And for Mac, it doesn't look too bad. It has some colors to allow you to differentiate between, say, the time and the actual message. On Windows, though, between the locked down window width and the fact that it's all in black and white, it is a bit painful to watch. So we're going to tell it to add this app, the free version. You can select different versions, and these will cost you, but they will up what you can actually do with it. So we're going to add our logging to
So
infinite.
most of the add-ons work.
Yeah.
They have like a free version, and then they kind of scale.
Yeah, most add-ons do have a free version. There are some that don't, but for the most part, they know if you're a developer, they want to get you using their add-on as soon as possible. That way you don't choose anyone else. I don't want to say locked in because that sounds slightly sinister, but it gets you using their add-on and your code is now built around that. And it might be inconvenient to go and move to something else. So it added it to infinite chamber. And if we back out, we can see that paper trail has been added. Now, that is incredibly underwhelming right now because we haven't done a darn thing with our app, which is fine. Now, as I stated earlier, we don't have, or we had those hard-coded configurations for OAuth, but we also had the process environment variable settings. Those are set right here in the config variables under settings. And in there is paper trail. All right, nothing too interesting in here, but we need to add a bit more. So we're going to hit edit. Now, again, I'm a cheater. I did some stuff ahead of time, but that's just fine. Copy and paste is a little bit easier with these sort of things, especially when you're dealing with strings that look like this. I should have memorized it. I'm a failure to computer security everywhere.
Or written on a sticky note.
Yeah. Adding more config variables is as easy as hitting that plus sign and removing them, hitting the negative sign. I don't want to remove my paper trail because, quite frankly, I'm not sure how I'd get that token back. bear with me. Another otherwise meaningless number and be difficult to memorize. Now, I've added 2 of the 3 config variables. The last one that I need is the redirect URL. But because that is based on what my Heroku instance is called, I need to set that a little bit differently. Back plus, and instead of fathomless plateau, that's what I was testing with earlier. I'm going to want to take infinite chamber up here, tack that on there, and grab the key name right there. All right, a little painful to watch, but not to set up. That's pretty easy. So now we have that all set up, and there's one last thing we have to do. Now, I told my Node application that the redirect URL is this new infinite chamber. I did not, however, tell Salesforce. So we log in again. Right, and this is what you're going to want to do if you're setting up a new app. You're going to want to go to App in the search, down to Create Apps, and Connected Apps. Now, my demo connected app here, that's where it was localhost, and Heroku. This is the one that is set up for communicating with whatever my Heroku app is called. So here we have the key, the consumer secret, and here's the callback URL. That's the one we want to edit right now. So I'm just going to grab our app name again, because I did things out of order. And just as we did in the configuration, we're going to replace that as well. And it says 2 to 10 minutes, and hopefully it'll be kind and let me set this up immediately. So this is all set up. We have our logging in place, and oh, perfect. It is actually logging. The logging is nice, it's color-coded. It tells you where the logs are originating from, either from the web app itself, Heroku Web, Heroku API. So back here, we hit our little box up here. Wow, Express again. In fact, if everything's going correctly, this will be no different than it was on localhost, except now we're out on the internet live. That's what I was afraid of. Heroku, Salesforce wasn't kind. I did have to wait a bit more time for that one. There is a mismatch in the redirect. I have my Node app telling it to use this new infinite chambers, and Salesforce still thinks that it wants to use fathomless plateau. Yeah, these are pretty good names. Well, in the meantime, I will tell you, you can change it right here. I'm not going to, because that would force Salesforce to go in and start the whole 2 to 10 minute thing over again, and I don't want to do that. Ready yet? Darn. Well, there's one more thing that I can do in the meantime. I did mention that there was logging on the command line in case you didn't want to use a add-on, or if you just simply couldn't, if you weren't in the right, maybe you're at your terminal and you don't have a desktop instance set up. Some people do work in just command line. There's no problem with using Node with nothing but Vim. So we go to Heroku, logs, and then we add on this This tells it to continue to log constantly and just keep spitting out whatever the newest log is. Then app and our app name. And I apologize due to projecting. The text on my screen is incredibly small. There we go. As I said, on Mac, it does look pretty good. We have some color coding going on here, and that is incredibly helpful. On Windows, you will get black and white, making this an app practically eye-bleeding. So, will Salesforce agree with me this time? Not crazy. That time, Salesforce did agree that I had the same redirect URL. And actually, it's the exact same thing as before, but on the internet. That makes it better.
Yep.
So, just 2 more slides. Why on earth go through all of this trouble? Why go through all this trouble when you have Visualforce and Apex? Not to disparage those two, but this gives you a lot of control. As you can see from the slider, I could control how much my wallet drained. In all seriousness, we can direct a lot of traffic at this. We can also go far beyond any boundaries of email limits that Salesforce puts in place. We can integrate with other systems more easily. Actually, this makes a fantastic use case, sitting as an integration point, because you can just have it constantly polling and processing and working, and then taking those results and pushing them up to Salesforce. Also, with all the talk of Canvas apps, if you're ever wondering, that sounds like a great idea, but where do I host it and what do I write it in? I think I just did an hour-long talk on that. I also have, because it's fun, and to me it is, right now what I do with at work is still Java. I'd like to maybe convince some people to do Node.js, but right now for me this is a hobby. But in reality, that is a terrible reason to go ahead and put, that's a terrible reason to base your entire project on, is because it's fun.
Or worse.
You want because it's fun to be the reason that you look into it, the reason that you study up, the reason that you have, okay, not to sound too corny, but some passion about this. Because it's fun is not a business decision. But it certainly helps.
Depends if you're a clown or something.
Yeah.
I suppose if your business is in being a clown, you do want fun to be a comedian as well. Fun is a business. In most cases, though, clowns aren't hiring you for your Node.js knowledge. So here's some extra resources. These are just a few of them. There are so incredibly many. I think, you know what, I'll post it up. Assuming that the YouTube video actually comes out of this correctly, I'll post it in the description. But there's a video series that just came out recently that is called Working with the Mean Stack or Getting Mean. And the mean stack is MongoDB, Angular, Node, and yes, that's it. Sorry, I can't spell either, apparently. Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. And those are what make up that particular tech stack, and they have a 3-part video series on working with it. Other than that, you have the official Node documentation. They have a fantastic community. Heroku as well, they have wonderful articles about setting up not just Node.js, but also all these different languages, and pretty much as much information as you could handle for getting set up with Heroku. So, any lingering questions after all that? No, perfect. I have answered everyone's questions.
Great job, Bob.
The infinite.